Hi everyone, it's Nishi here. I hope you have a really good day. So in today's video, what I want to talk about is whether or not you should be worried about hiring self-employed people in your business. Some of you might have actually heard of the IR35 legislation, and the reason it came about is when you essentially have an employee in your business compared to a self-employed person, HMRC gets a lot more in tax when you've got an employee. The reason for that is they're paying income tax, but they're also paying employees and employers national insurance. Usually when you've got self-employed people or people working through their own limited company in your business, they might be paying corporation tax and a small amount of dividend tax, or they might be paying income tax and then a smaller amount of national insurance. So in those situations, depending on how much someone actually earns, HMRC can be losing out on money. So HMRC have created legislation around identifying people who are only doing it just to reduce their tax bill, and in the past they've attempted to prosecute people and say this is an artificial arrangement, you are really an employee of this business and you should pay all the employee and employer taxes. So every now and then someone gets in touch with me and they are worried about this because they read all these things about IR35 and how HMRC prosecute people, but this video is all about explaining why you shouldn't be worried about it. So I talk about a few things. So if you've got a self-employed person in the business, you've got to just check they are genuinely self-employed. So firstly, you just got to have a proper contract which says they're providing services to you and they're going to invoice you, that they are responsible for paying their own taxes and many other things. So you'd have to go to a solicitor or a contract specialist to just get that right. But also you've got to have the right kind of insurances. But from a tax point of view, there are also exemptions to a lot of the tax rules where in certain cases you've also got to deduct national insurance from them as well, even though they are self-employed. I believe for certain types of cleaner, for example, even though you're just paying their invoices, you've also got to actually deduct their national insurance. And there's certain other industries. So there's all these little caveats that can trip people up if they're not completely aware of it. But actually, the most important thing is HMRC, historically, I read a statistic, I think it was on the QDOS contractor website, where HMRC would lose 4 out of 5 prosecutions for IR35. IR35 is the legislation around people who are actually employees working as self-employed or contracting through their own companies. So even historically, when HMRC have tried to enforce this, they've almost always failed. But one of the other reasons is actually because you've just got to really think about, is there any money in it for HMRC? Because if you've got someone in your business and they're not making a lot of money anyway, and they're not over the thresholds where they would pay national insurance and you'd pay national insurance on them, then HMRC probably aren't going to bother anyway. But one other thing to remember is if this is something to do with the construction industry, for example, then you have to apply what you call the CIS, and the CIS is about deducting money from them before you actually pay them and then handing it over to HMRC. So there are a lot of rules that you do need to be aware of. But in general, just because you're hiring someone as a self-employed person, it can be very difficult for HMRC to prove that actually they were an employee. So just by having the right kind of contracts, the right kind of insurances in place, and making sure you do stick to the right legislation, then you are generally pretty safe, especially if you're a small business, because IR35, a lot of the legislation only applies to businesses turning over more than £10 million. So it means like if HMRC thinks it's an artificial arrangement and your turnover is less than 10 million, then they have to go after the contractor in that case. But if your turnover is over 10 million, they could potentially go after you and ask you for all the tax they've lost out on. But in general, it rarely happens, and they do lose most cases because it's such a subjective arrangement. They have to prove that there was no direction, supervision, and control. There was, whereas you have to prove that there wasn't, and ultimately it's very difficult for either party to do that, so most cases in the past have fallen apart. So if you are worried about hiring self-employed people or people working through their own companies, then just reach out, talk to me. I know quite a lot about this, and also check out our website and all the other great content we've got on there. I'll see you at the next video.